All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Mike Fiffik. I'm the partner here at Fiffik Law Group in offices in Pittsburgh and also suburban Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And we're here to talk to you about the Corporate Transparency Act. And the question that I have for you or for your, if you're a small business owner or for your customers, if you are working in the small business community, is are your customers ready? Are you ready for the Corporate Transparency Act? So let's talk a little bit about that. I've got a long agenda today, so I'm probably going to zip through a good bit of these things. This will be a high-level overview. There are certainly lots of resources available online if you want to dig a little deeper into the various aspects of the Corporate Transparency Act. You may see abbreviations BOI in here. That means beneficial owner information, meaning owner of the company or somebody that is required to be included in a report for a company. So I'll just give you that little bit of jargon note there as we move along. If you see BOI, it's beneficial owner information. So let's dig on right in about the background of the Corporate Transparency Act. And it's really an anti-money laundering effort because there are businesses that can be opened, and it's very fuzzy and hazy about whether who owns these businesses, and they've been used to engage in lots of fraudulent transfers and financial crimes. So the act was put in place. The effective date is January 1st of this year, 2024. And the provisions, or all of the things that have to happen in accordance with the Corporate Transparency Act, are administered by the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. I may use that acronym FinCEN, which is part of the U.S. Department of Treasury. So that's where things get filed. That's where all of the information has to happen. So the final rules are being rolled out. There are basically three parts to this. The first is the reporting rule or the filing rule. The next is going to be an access rule. So who has access to the information that is being filed? And then the third rulemaking that has to happen is how can it be used? What it can be used for? So the rulemaking regarding the filing is now out. The final rules have been issued. They do get amended from time to time, but that's all existed. And then the access proposed rules were just dropped, I think, earlier this week or late last week. That information is available on the Corporate Transparency Act website for anybody that wants to take a look at those. And that says, you know, who has access to this information. Your clients or your customers, or you may be wondering, if I file this information with the government, who can see it, right? Who has access to it? And then the final rulemaking about how it can be used has yet to be dropped. So that information is still forthcoming. So this is kind of rolling out, like changing the tires on a moving bus. So key dates for you to understand: January 1st, 2024. Newly formed companies, right? If they are registered on or after January 1st of this year, they must file their initial beneficial ownership information report, BOI report, within 90 days after forming their new business. So the first deadline really is 90 days after new businesses are formed in 2024. They have to file a lot sooner than everybody else. For existing companies, meaning those that were in existence before January 1st of this year, they have to file their BOI report by the end of 2024 or before January 1st of 2025. So those are really the key dates that you need to understand about the Corporate Transparency Act. So let's dig into some of the substance. What is a reporting company? So unless exempt, and there are exemptions, all domestic and foreign companies must file beneficial ownership information reports. So by some estimates, I saw that 32 million small businesses in the United States are going to have to file these BOI reports with FinCEN. So it's an enormous number. Virtually every small business owner in the United States is going to have to file one of these reports. So what companies have to file? Basically, any type of a company. It's a corporation or a limited liability company or any type of business entity where you had to register or file something with your Department of State, Corporations Bureau, whatever the governmental entity is where you have to file papers to start your business. If you had to file papers to start your business with the government to form your business, then you are a reporting company for purposes of filing the BOI reports. However, some types of companies don't have to file. A sole proprietorship, if you're operating a business, trading and doing business as, Joe's car cleaning kind of a thing, and you really haven't formed a specific business entity by filing papers with the Corporations Bureau here in Pennsylvania, then you're a sole proprietorship. You don't have any reporting obligations under this act. If it's a trust or some type of a business trust, there really aren't very many of those out there, you don't have to file. If you're a general partnership, meaning you're operating a business informally with another person, and you haven't filed anything with the Corporations Bureau, then you're not a reporting company under this act. But by and large, if you're operating a business, you're probably a reporting company. You should be checking in to see if you have some type of obligations. Foreign reporting companies, meaning those that are formed under the laws of a foreign country, but that are registered to do business in the United States, are also reporting companies for purposes of complying with this act. Now, there are a lot of exemptions. So you should just presume for all intents and purposes that you're a reporting company. Then the next step is to determine whether you fall under any of the exemptions. So not all businesses need to file, even if they are an LLC or a corporation. Not all of them have to file. And so there are a couple of different types of exemptions that we want to look at. The first and easiest is there are 23 specific exempt type entities set forth in the regulations that don't have to file, right? Many of these have already have filing requirements, substantial financial reporting requirements with other governmental entities, and so there's really no particular purpose for them to file under the Corporate Transparency Act. The other significant exemption are large operating companies. And so this is the one I think that will apply to most regular businesses that are operating out there, on the street. They have to have all of these criteria. First, they have to employ 20 or more than 20 full-time employees or full-time equivalents, right? Full-time equivalents that could be separated between two different people, but more than 20 employees. Regularly conducts business at a physical location in the United States, right? So they could own property, they could lease property, but they have a place of business in the United States. And last year, or the prior year, they filed a federal income tax return that showed them having more than $5 million in gross revenues, top line revenues. So they have to have all of those things in order to be exempt under the large operating company exemption. So there are going to be some businesses that covers, right? They could be a publicly traded company. So if they have publicly traded securities that are traded on some type of a stock exchange, they also don't have to file. And that's not really who we're talking about here. That's not our market. Tax exempt entities will not have to file either. So if it's a 501c3 tax exempt organization, it doesn't have to file. Or political organizations, charitable trusts, charitable entities probably are not going to have a filing obligation. So your local church, don't worry, They don't have to file. Or your little mom and pop 501c3 nonprofit that is supporting things in the community, they don't really have to file either. That's not really the intention. Wholly owned subsidiaries of existing entities also can be exempt as well. So if there are businesses that have subsidiaries, then that's definitely something that's going to be a little bit more complex from the standpoint of figuring out which of those business entities has to file. The revenues of those entities can be counted towards the $5 million in gross revenues if they look at an entity and its subsidiaries as one organization, that they can all be exempted. So if an exempt entity has $5 million in gross, more than $5 million in gross revenues, and has all of those, meets all of those other exemption criteria, the subsidiaries that it owns will also end up being exempt. That's basically what that means. So inactive entities. We probably know people who have these types of business entities laying around. So if you have a business entity that you formed years ago that's dormant, that you haven't been doing anything with it, these type of entities can also be exempt. So it has to meet all of these criteria. It was in existence on or before January 1st of 2020, right? So anything formed after January 1st of 2020, if it's dormant, you still have to file. But if it was been around since before 2020, and it's not actively involved in business, it meets all of these other criteria, really has to have very little in the way of money, very little in the way of revenue, basically just a dormant LLC that's been floating around out there that you never got around to dissolving, then these are also exempt, right? But, if I were telling somebody, do you want to figure out whether you're exempt or not under this inactivity exemption, I'd just tell people to file. I mean, I'm not sure that there's any big reason for them not to file, and why guess, why run the risk of being caught up for some reason if you're wrong. So just file. I think you'll find out a little bit later as we talk about it, especially for these inactive entities. It's pretty easy to comply. Now, if they have multiple members and multiple partners along the way, and all these people are in the wind, so to speak, then maybe you just don't want to, maybe you'd want to try to qualify under this exempt entity. But otherwise, if it's just you, it's an old business entity that you haven't used for a while, really, I would tell you just to go ahead and file and be done with it, and avoid any kind of risk of having a problem. So these are the entities that are specifically exempt under the regulations. And again, I will provide at the end of the workshop some links, some places where you can go to get more information about this. In a great surprise to me, FinCEN has been very good at publishing information that's very readable for small business owners about all of this stuff. It's really quite amazing. I think they've done a pretty good job. There's a lot of good information available that I think would answer a lot of questions that small business owners would have if they want to DIY all of this stuff and figuring it out by themselves online. Of course, if they have a small business plan with Legal Shield, they can certainly call their provider lawyers and just ask a bunch of questions and be able to figure it out in the course of a phone call rather than spend a lot of time online trying to figure this out themselves. But these are just some examples of the types of entities that are not going to be required to file. These are specific exemptions. And a lot of these really don't apply to a lot of normal small businesses, right? You don't run into too many people that are a small business that are a public utility, or that they are an insurance company, or they are a credit union. So a lot of these entities have a lot of financial reporting requirements with other governmental regulators of one kind or another. So there's really no reason to put the burden of them filing under this too. They are already highly regulated to begin with. So it's not a problem. So some takeaways from an exemption analysis, the first step in determining whether your business has to file the BOI reports. See if you're one of the specific exempted companies. And then if not, move on to see if you qualify under the large company exemption or if it's a dormant exemption. Otherwise, if none of those apply, then you probably are not exempt and you have to file. So here's a link. This is the first link, and I can make this available to everybody as a follow-up to the webinar that attended today. I'll include these links in there so you don't have to worry about trying to write that down. But there's a small business compliance guide produced by FinCEN on the beneficial owner information reporting. And we'll make sure that this gets out to all of you so that you have it available to you or that you can share it with somebody else. So let's talk about what's actually in these reports that have to be filed with the government. So there's two different sets of reporting, right? The companies are responsible for filing the reports, but within the report filed by the company is information about the owners, the beneficial owners of the company. So the company has to file, but they also have to collect information from the owners and file that in the company report, right? Because they're reporting on who the beneficial owners of these companies are. So I really think there's two different reports going on here. The company, but also the individuals are filing their own information. So the company has to fill out, it's basically an online form that you fill out. I'll show you an example of it. Full legal name or the fictitious name, the DBA of the company, street address, no PO boxes, where your business is located, so the jurisdiction of formation. So if you have a Delaware LLC, but you're located physically in Pennsylvania, they're going to want to know that you formed in Delaware, so where you formed, your tax identification number, kind of all basic information that most businesses should have. And then the owners of the business have to provide this information: their full name, date of birth, their street address, meaning no PO boxes again, so a street address, a identifying number for an ID of some kind. So their driver's license number, their passport number, they want the government wants that information. And then an image, so a picture of your driver's license, a picture of your passport, whatever document it is that you're using, they're going to want a picture of that too. So might make you feel a little bit queasy to provide that information to the government, although the Treasury probably already has it anyway for you. But this is, again, it's another reporting requirement that some folks may just feel uncomfortable about providing. And if I were you, I'd feel uncomfortable about having my information out there as well. Now, one of the problems that small businesses are going to have, especially small businesses with multiple owners that have been around for a while, is they have business owners that are no longer associated with the business, and they never really followed through to officially, or cross the T's, dot the I's, remove these people as owners of their business, right? 2 or 3 business partners went in together on some business. Maybe it was a particular deal or an investment of some kind, and it never really went anywhere, or only partially came to fruition, and one of the beneficial owners is moved in the wind. They stopped communicating with everybody. Nobody knows what happened to them, right? It's not unusual at all for that type of a situation to happen. So if you're filing these reports for a small business, what do you do whenever one of your beneficial owners, you have no idea where they are, you have no information about where their current address is, you don't have their driver's license number, it wasn't information that you asked them for whenever you guys decided to go into business together? How do you comply? Well, this is a practical problem that hasn't quite yet been solved by FinCEN. So you can check an unknown. They might be changing the form in order to allow this to happen, but this is a problem. This is going to be a problem for small businesses if they have no information about their beneficial owners, or some of them. They're just not going to be able to send that information in. So it'd be kind of a pain. Now, there's also another category of people who have to report information in addition to beneficial owners. It's a category of people called company applicants, right? And so this only applies to businesses formed on or after January 2024, January 1st of 2024. So the person who files the papers for the business entity, right, is a company applicant by and large, right? And if they're the one that's registering the business, they're going to have to provide their information as well, same information as the beneficial owner. So who does this really apply to? It's going to apply to attorneys, staff members in law firms that are filing LLCs for people. It's going to apply to accountants who might be assisting somebody in filing a business. It might apply to services that assist people in preparing and filing information or filing, registering their businesses. So there's a whole category of people that are going to have to provide their personal information to, potentially, for every business that they file. So this is definitely something that if you're a practicing attorney and you form LLCs or corporations for people, you have to be thinking about how you are going to deal with this, because you're going to have to provide your information with that initial report that's filed 90 days after you form your client's business entity. So it's just another filing requirement. Now, what I'm suggesting to a lot of people is to obtain a FinCEN identifier. So if you are somebody that has to provide your personal information for a company that has a reporting requirement, you can you could do one of two things in order to help that company comply with their obligations. You can either give them all of your information, so your name, your home address, and your copy of your ID. You can give that to the company so that they can then include it on these reports that they file with the government. Now, the problem with that is, if you have an ownership interest in lots of different businesses, now you're having to provide this information to lots of different people. You may not want your business partners to have your copy of your driver's license or your home address, right? BOI, I just saw a thing in there. BOI means beneficial owner information, BOI. So it's the company has to report the information about its owners. And that means their names, their personal addresses, their copy of their ID, either a driver's license, passport, and their driver's license number, their passport number. That's the information that owners of companies have to provide to the company so that they can comply with their reports under this act. So that can really be a pain in the rear end for you to do if you've got a business ownership interest in lots of different businesses. You don't want all those people to have your information, or it's just a pain in the rear end to remember which, which businesses you might be a member of, you could have forgotten, and to go about providing this information to all of these businesses so that they can comply. So my suggestion to you is the easiest way to do this is for you to obtain a FinCEN identifier. So beneficial owners themselves can apply for a FinCEN ID or a FinCEN identifier. So you can file your personal information directly with FinCEN. They'll give you an identifier. And instead of giving your driver's license to 10 different companies so that they can file their reports, you can simply give them your FinCEN ID. And the company can provide FinCEN with either all of your personal information or your FinCEN ID. And if they just include your FinCEN ID on the report, they have complied with the regulations, right? And it's on you, if you have a FinCEN ID, that if your driver's license changes, maybe you move and go to a different state, you have a new ID, or if you've moved and your address changes, you are obligated to update that information directly with FinCEN because you have a FinCEN identifier. But I think it's a whole lot easier for you to do that, one filing and you've updated it, rather than having to give all of this new information to lots of different companies if you have an ownership interest in a lot of different companies. So, and for companies, it's easier for them to just get a FinCEN identifier because all you have to do is do that once. If you have the FinCEN ID for everybody that has an ownership interest in your business, that's all you ever need. You never have to get the driver's license. You never have to update any of that information about your owners. They're obligated to do it, right? All you need is their FinCEN identifier, and that's all you'll ever need. So it really makes things a lot easier for everybody if you get a FinCEN identifier. And I'll be happy to answer questions towards the end of the session here on any of that stuff. All right, so the contents of the report. The reporting company has to certify that the information is accurate, true, complete. And so you're attesting to a government, just like the governmental entity, just like you do when you file your tax returns, right? This is true and correct. You just like you do whenever you're filing an affidavit or filing a pleading in court, right? You are attesting to the government that the information in this report for your company is true and accurate and complete. Now, you might be mistaken, right? Maybe you mistyped it, or maybe somebody gave you an address that you thought was good, and in fact, it turns out to be a bad address because maybe somebody doesn't want to give you the real address and they're lying to you. So there are lots of ways that the information can be inaccurate, right? But we'll talk about the penalties later. The penalties are for willful failures to comply, right? Accidental failures to comply, that's going to be less of a problem. And if you find out that the information that you provided on a report is incorrect, you have 90 days to update it. So you can always correct it. So you can file an amendment to whatever it is that you filed on behalf of your company to correct the information. There are lots of opportunities to correct bad information in a prior report. And there's an online interface where you do this. So the filing is relatively simple, relatively painless. I can't remember who the cook was. I think it was Wolfgang Puck. Very simple, very easy, right? They're really trying to make it that way. So lots of opportunities to correct that information. So let's talk about the filing process. I've gone through it myself. I have a FinCEN identifier. My attorneys have FinCEN identifiers here. Anybody that does business work for small business owners. And we have gone through this filing process ourselves for our company and for some clients. So let's talk a little bit about the practical impact. I think I mentioned some numbers before. 32 million small businesses are going to have to file in 2024. That's who we think will be covered and required to file. We think that there'll be several million filings thereafter. There's a lot of burden, 32 million hours of time spent by businesses filing in the first year, 32 million hours. Think about the dollar value of that. So, there's a burden on small businesses to get this stuff done. And, that doesn't really include all of the time it takes for these small businesses to figure out, all right, who are the beneficial owners in the company? Beneficial owner could be a shareholder, but it can also be somebody that has substantial control over the business. We'll talk a little bit about that. So sometimes there's a little bit of time going through that entire thought process about, okay, I have to file, but whose information do I have to include on my report, and to go through that, and then gathering all of the information. It really can be kind of a burdensome process for small businesses. So as I mentioned, FinCEN's trying to make it easy. There is a secure system, BOSS they call it. It's an online portal where you file the information, and it's a secure connection to FinCEN to file this report, or allegedly it's a secure. God only knows who has access to it anymore these days. If you've read those reports about the Chinese infiltrators basically already in all of our utilities and just been sitting around monitoring their activities over the years. Who knows what's secure anymore these days? That's, really a real concern for lots of people. Who are the beneficial owners? So who's got a file? Whose information you got to collect? You would think that that'd be something easy to identify. It's just somebody that has an ownership interest in the business, but it's not really quite that easy. So a beneficial owner is anybody who directly or indirectly, that's where the lawyers come in to talk to you about what that means. But if they have substantial control over the company, they could be a beneficial owner, even if they don't have an ownership interest in the business at all, right? And it has to be somebody that has at least 25% of the ownership interest in the business. So it's a little fuzzy about who the owners actually are. But if you own 25% or more in the business, you got to file. But it could be that you can have substantial control. So let's just say it's not unusual. I've run into this many, many times, right? I've got somebody that's the 100% owner of a business, but they're not really involved in the day-to-day affairs. They don't bother themselves with important decisions like payroll and signing contracts for the company. Maybe they've designated that task to a chief operating officer or an office manager of some kind who really makes all those decisions, and the business owner's just aloof for whatever reason. Maybe they're semi-retired, maybe they do sales and that's all that they do, and they've assigned these tasks to somebody else in the business. The people that you've assigned these tasks to that are basically running the business and making the trains run on time day in and day out could potentially be beneficial owners, and you're supposed to provide their information as part of your report for your small business. So it's not the easiest, not necessarily the easiest thing to do to figure out, in fact, who are the beneficial owners of the business that have to file. Substantial control. What does that mean? Could be a senior officer of the reporting company or a person with authority to remove senior officers. So if you're on a board of directors of a company that's required to report, you're probably a beneficial owner and have to file because you have control over who is or is not the president or the officers. You may be specifically in charge of appointing those people for the business. If you're making important decisions for the business, like big payroll decisions, I think you're probably a beneficial owner as well. So this is really where having access to legal advice is going to be important, because you're going to want to talk to your lawyer about what the roles are in the business, who does what, and that person can give you an opinion as to whether that you're going to have to include that person's personal information in the reporting, or ask them to get a FinCEN identifier. What I will tell a lot of people is, when in doubt, file it anyway. I think that that's just the important thing. Here's another aspect of substantial control: if they make important decisions. So the attributes of the reporting business, terminating business lines or ventures, compensation schemes, incentives, all of this stuff are important decisions for purposes of the business. So you sort of know it when you see it, kind of a thing. There's no case law, right? There have been no lawsuits that have been filed over the definition of these terms. This is all brand new. These regulations were just published at the end of 2023. So I think caution and conservatism is really the call of the day here. When in doubt, I would probably tell somebody, yeah, that's probably a beneficial owner. Yes, they probably should get a FinCEN identifier. Yes, you should probably include them in your filing just to be safe. So ownership interest, what's an ownership interest? I think in most instances that'd be pretty easy to identify. If you have a membership interest in a limited liability company or shares in a corporation, if you have a partnership of some kind that's formed by filing with your state regulator, and that could be a limited liability partnership, then if you have you're a partner, then you probably are going to be a beneficial owner, whether you're a general partner or a limited partner. But if you have a profit interest in the business, there are lots of different weird financial incentives out there. So if you're an investor in a business, you may have a convertible, you may have a loan that you've made to them that's convertible into equity in the business. Then you are probably a beneficial owner. You may be a beneficial owner. If you have stock options, right, or you're able to buy into the business or sell out of the business, then you probably have an ownership interest in the business and have to file. These are a little bit more sophisticated types of situations. I think that they're really the vast minority of situations or folks that really have to think about whether, their connection to the business renders them a beneficial owner for filing purposes. But I think for the vast majority of small businesses, it's going to be pretty simple, right? If you own 25% more of the business, you got to file. If you have a lot of authority over in decision making over the business, whether you're an owner or not, you probably have to file. And I think that those are going to be most of the evaluation points for purposes of determining who is going to have to file, going forward. Ownership includes joint ownership of an undivided interest. So maybe a husband and wife are joint shareholders in a business. They're both going to have to file, right? Maybe it's a trust that owns an interest in a business. That's not terribly unusual, but you don't run into that very often. But yeah, it could be a family that has a trust that are the owners of an LLC. You might see that for gas leasing. That became a little bit more common with those types of, with that coming about here, especially in Pennsylvania and probably in Ohio as well, or in some other states where Marcellus Shale or Utica Shale or gas leasing, you may have seen some of those types of arrangements out there. But yeah, you might have an LLC that has the gas leasing rights or ownership interest in the gas leasing rights, and the trust is a member of that. The trust probably would have to be filing as well. So lots of different situations, right? If you've got a connection to a business, directly or indirectly, you really should be taking a look at those connections to the business to see whether there is a reporting requirement for you. So just trying to give you an idea. There are exceptions to beneficial ownership. A minor doesn't have to do it. The creditor whose sole interest in the business has the right to receive repayment. So if you've loaned money to the business, that doesn't mean you have an ownership interest in it. You're not going to have to give the company that owes you money all of your personal information. So there are some exceptions. And again, this is really where having access to an attorney is just super important for some of these businesses. I think that the complicated ones are going to be real estate investment ventures, figuring out whether they have more than $5 million in revenue. You could have a lot of different people that are involved in those investment situations, especially real estate development. I think that that's really where some of the more hairy evaluations of filing are going to happen. Whether the entity has to file, are the investors in that business entity, do they truly qualify as beneficial owners, and do they have to file? I think that that's really where a lot of the more tricky evaluations are going to sit. Company applicant that's going to be an attorney, right? So somebody who is filing that creates the domestic reporting entity. That's usually going to be the attorney, the accountant, whoever is doing the filing. It could be a clerk, somebody in the law firm that's doing it. They're going to be the company applicants that have to report. I think we talked about that previously. So here's just some examples, right? Estate filing office employees, commercial business formation services, law firm staff, self-filing. If you file your own LLC, you're going to have to report your own information. You're a company applicant in addition to being a beneficial owner. So you may have a couple of different filing obligations there. Okay, getting closer to the end. Obligation to update these reports. I'm sorry, I misspoke. If you filed something and something changes, you're going to have to update that report within 30 calendar days of the change. You have to update reports also if a reporting company becomes eligible for an exemption, or a variety of other reasons for updating. But the key is, if you do have to do an update, you have 30 days. You have 30 days to do it, and that's the important thing. I suspect that 30 days is going to get extended to 90 days. I think that's probably something that'll happen. I don't think the government's going to come down on you. They'll probably give you a chance to update it. If they do find that it's not right, you might just get a notice to say, hey, this information is incorrect. File your updated report, and you have X number of days to file your updated report. I think that's going to be a lot of the response to these things from FinCEN. I don't really think that they're going to be in the business of putting business owners out of business, or fining them, or coming down on them for relatively innocuous mistakes, errors, those types of things. I hope folks aren't particularly concerned about that. You want to comply, but I think that's going to be your willful, repeated, egregious violators who are going to end up getting crosswise with FinCEN. All right, penalties. Since we were talking about that, there are civil and criminal penalties for willfully failing to comply or filing false or fraudulent information. Really, this is what FinCEN is wanting to do, is to be able to, because these entities had very fuzzy ownership information, and the crimes were these companies were being used to commit crimes, especially financial crimes, and the government can never really catch up to who these people really were. They're gonna come down, especially on filing fraudulent or false beneficial ownership information. So, entities that say John Smith owns it when John Smith isn't really a person, or that's not really the owner, or they're just putting some straw person in there as the owner when in fact it's somebody entirely different. I think those are going to be the situations where FinCEN is going to want to be particularly interested in coming down on entities. So yes, there are penalties for failing to file, and I think if they've sent a report out saying you need to file and you don't file, and just don't, you ignore all of these things, you could probably end up with some civil fines or penalties of some kind. I don't know that they'll necessarily be out there prosecuting 10 million businesses because they failed to file. Civil penalty, $500 per violation per day. So it can be serious, up to $10,000. There are criminal penalties as well. So they're out there, right? I don't think that business owners should be terribly concerned about this, but again, they're out there for FinCEN to bring the hammer down on somebody or to get them to comply. And I think that that's really what it is. It's going to be put out there as a threat, either file this report or we're going to take a look at some of these other things. Folks may rightly wonder who has access to this information and how can it be used. Really, it's going to be used only by financial reporting institutions, probably to report information to FinCEN. So if there's some kind of funky business transactions going on with a financial institution, they're going to be able to have access to the beneficial owner information, and they're probably going to have to file reports with FinCEN. That's primarily how this information is intended to be used. But, it could be that companies that collect this information for its beneficial owners misuse this information. Maybe they send a copy of the report to somebody. I mean, who knows how this information could be used. But misuse and unauthorized disclosure of a beneficial owner's personal information definitely can be a violation of the Act. And so there are civil and criminal penalties for misuse or unauthorized disclosure of this personal information for business owners out there. So there is some remedy available in the event your information is misused. So what should you be doing now? Some practical takeaway tips, and then I'll be happy to answer a few questions. Number one, of course, determine whether your existing business entities are subject to reporting, right? Or whether they are exempt. So if you have an ownership interest in a business of any kind, you really should be asking this question if you're not in control of doing the filing, or if you are in control asking these questions yourself, to make sure that the companies that you're involved in are complying with this act. So that's the most important thing. If the company is not exempt, then companies should really take stock of who the beneficial owners are of the company for purposes of filing. So whose information do they need to collect and include in the report for the company? Businesses should create a process for gathering the information that they need to comply with the report. And what I'm saying here, moving to number 4, is I think companies, if they have beneficial owners, they should either encourage them or require them to obtain FinCEN identifiers or FinCEN IDs and provide those ID numbers to the company, because the easiest thing for the company to do is to include the FinCEN ID on the reports, and then they're done. You know, there's no process really that's needed in order to annually send out a request to update your driver's license and your personal address. You know, that can be really kind of a pain for small businesses to do. If you just ask for the FinCEN ID for your business owners or your beneficial owners, then that's all you ever need. And then the obligation to update is pushed on them. So that's what I would suggest that companies do, is include in their operating agreements or their policies, HR policies, you know, if you are deemed to be a beneficial owner under this act, then you are required to obtain a FinCEN identifier and to provide your FinCEN ID to the company so that we can include it. And you authorize us specifically to provide that information with the BOI report with FinCEN. So that's going to be some modification of operating agreements, HR policies, you know, authorizations to include this information. Those are some things that companies should really be doing to include in their corporate governance documents and their HR documents, their employment policies, their employment agreements, you know, all of those things. Those are going to be some documents that need to be addressed with small businesses. Companies should also figure out how to file the report with FinCEN and get that done. So these are some of the practical takeaways for small business owners about what they should be doing. And I can't stress enough, they really should put in place the requirements and the processes to make sure that their beneficial owners get FinCEN IDs. For companies, that's just going to be the easiest way to comply, so that you don't have to worry about a business owner, you know, going in the wind, disappearing, not being cooperative with you on a going forward basis to provide updated information. You just don't want to have those problems for your company. So you really should be requiring your owners to get FinCEN IDs and give it to you. That'll make it easier. And then it's on them basically to update their information with FinCEN on a going forward basis.